Hello, my name is Angel Sarah, and today I want to talk about my mental and physical health journey in a chronological way. I'm gonna kind of do it as more of an overview of my whole life, and I plan to make more videos about specific topics and dive deeper into each of those topics in a chronological way. But first, I wanted to do kind of like a big picture sort of thing. Also, your health and healing is a lifelong journey, so it's something I'm sure I'll gain new perspective on throughout time as I have done so far, and it's not over either, and so I'll have more to say about my health as time continues on. Before I get started, I also want to mention just a general trigger warning for lots of things, anything that could be upsetting physically or mentally. So, if you're not in the right space to watch something like this right now, then I just wanted to give you a heads up that this does involve a large array of triggering topics. I also wanted to mention before getting into it that I'll be being vague on specifics of certain things on purpose, as this is a story for me to tell about me, not necessarily the other specific people in my life. So, um, before I before I was born, so when I was in utero, I I was having a tough time due to the environment that my mom was in. And before going any further, I had a variety of caregivers growing up, and I won't specify. So when I was born, with epigenetics, it triggers certain responses, and so I was already born with depression and anxiety and PTSD due to certain situations my mother was in. I was also born in fight or flight, which I heard is fairly common for people with autism. And I was born with my neck straight up, which isn't really supposed to happen with newborns. And I was looking around the room as if I was trying to like figure out, who I needed to fight to get out of this situation. Um, and so that's kind of how I was born. And then from the ages of like when I was born until around the age of 3, unfortunately, one of the people who was caring for me did SA me throughout those years. So not only I'm realizing now, I think I am just gonna laugh a bit throughout things because it's a lot on my body, and it helps keep things light enough and move energy through myself about these really hard topics. So, unfortunately, what was happening with this caregiver also was they specifically programmed me to have dissociative identity disorder. So, what happened is I view myself as having 4 alters. Um, the first one being Sarah, which is my middle name, kind of more who I was born as, but like with anxiety, depression, autism, ADHD. This caregiver programmed 2 of the alters. One I call Void, who has depression and suicidality, and the other who I call Star, who has narcissistic personality disorder. So when I was 4, it triggered the last alter because I found out about the SA. I didn't know what was happening or that this was a bad thing before that. And at 4, my last altar arrived, which I call Little Lulu. I have a great grandmother called Grandma Lou, and that was one of my nicknames because I was very similar to her in a lot of ways in my childhood. And so Sarah, the first altar, was kind of like the trauma holder, the one who went through the stuff. And then little Lulu was more the gatekeeper and kind of sealed Sarah up in my mind, kind of like a little seed, and sealed Sarah and put her away so I couldn't remember anything after this altar, little Lulu, was created. So at this time, I had a lot of negative self-image as well because I viewed myself as just an innately bad person. I started having, after the age of 4, like intrusive thoughts. I didn't really know, like, I didn't know what mental health was at all. I didn't know people could self-harm or end their life. So it was more just this sense of like dread and hopelessness. And unfortunately, I also started having sexually inappropriate, intrusive thoughts as well that started at the age of 4. So I kind of thought, especially because I didn't remember what caused this, I thought I was just like born as like a wrong bad person. So I kind of throughout my life was just more doing things to make other people happy. The altar Little Lulu is really who I showed the world as like a people pleaser of like, I'm gonna make sure nothing else bad happens. I don't really care about living, but I'll try to make everyone else happy and make sure they don't get hurt. Which I realize now was also just not allowing other people to deal with their own issues. But also that was not my job as a child, nor ought to any child's job be. So yeah, also what happened with dissociation by the age of 4 is that, I'm just gonna breathe for a second. Is that, so I had DID. I also had depersonalization. I couldn't really, like, I never really recognized myself as myself. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. It was like I could see myself as the mask I presented to the world, this like happy, kind of confident, person. But then it's like I thought I was my thoughts and feelings. So I thought I was like this perverted, just, suicidal, depressed person, and it didn't match. And so I couldn't really see myself in the mirror. I also like dissociated just very out of body a lot. When I was in certain traumatic situations, because I did go through just this psychological torture, which I'll go into later, throughout my childhood, where I would kind of just float above everything. And I also had derealization. So just feeling like my life wasn't very real, my surroundings, my conversations, just the outside world, kind of almost like the Truman Show. It just felt more like I was an observer of my life. So, ages 5 to 6 now, I used to cry really profusely and it felt like I was dying. Oh, yes, because also what happened, throughout all of this, and I think even, with me being born how I was that I was having chronic pain and I had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and POTS, and my connective tissue, which I kind of view as almost like your will to live, like your vibrancy, your energy flowing through you in like a spiritual sense. I had no will to live, at least by the age of 4. And it just, throughout my life, it just got worse and worse and worse. But I had no idea that was going on at this time. But it hurt, and my whole body hurt, and I just didn't know it. I didn't know anything else other than it. I didn't know I was going through all this. Oh, yes, and I had one other dissociative thing too. It's called Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Um, I heard it described as like usually only kids get it when they're having fevers. It happens in a lot of different ways. I had all of the ways where things go like further and closer, bigger and smaller, heavier and lighter, like 2D and 3D. So by the so by the age of 4, just all of this was happening. I also, from maybe the age of like 4 to 12, I had a lot of, I was sick a lot. I had the fever and flu a lot, and I did hallucinate when I was having like really sick or having flu symptoms. Mostly just visual. I had a few auditory hallucinations, but I knew how to stop them. So by the age of like 5 and 6, as I was saying, so I used to cry as if I was dying because it felt like I was, and I felt suicidal, but I didn't know how to explain. I had no vocabulary. I had no memory of what happened. It was just this. It just felt like I was dying. Um, but I stopped crying by the age of 6 because it just never could get fixed. I didn't know what the problem was. No one else knew what the problem was or how to help me. And so I, from that time until the age of like 17, I did cry like every night. Once other people were asleep, because I didn't want to bother anyone. I just wanted to help their life. And I just felt very uncomfortable. So now, okay, from the age of 6 to 17. Yeah, so I wrote down some things as well. So a few things happened between this time. When I was 14 is when my puberty started, and I started getting migraines most months. I started having a headache that just never stopped. It's just a constant headache. And my muscles ached everywhere. Like I went to physical therapy for it. Didn't help. It wasn't specific enough. It was just like a sports physical therapy place, and they're like, your backpack's too heavy, which probably didn't help, but was not the cause because it was Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Um, and I would get like massages, and all the massage therapists were like, your back's really messed up. I've never seen someone so young with such a messed up back. So that was encouraging. And at that time, I didn't know what else to do. I tried physical therapy for, I don't know, 6+ months, didn't work. But that's when I started knowing I was in pain. Like it definitely at least set in by the time I was born, and then really heavily by the time I was 4. And I just didn't know. I didn't know anything else in life. So I also wanted to mention here types of trauma that I went through. So like some trauma is like intentional, other trauma is not. They both hurt. So like neglect definitely occurred, but also very intentional psychological torture. And this is kind of also how the alter of Star was kind of informed as being a narcissist, as I was taught very intentional narcissistic ways of treating people terribly. So it was intentional. Not that all narcissists intentionally hurt people or hurt people at all, but that's the type of trauma that I went through. So there's also different trauma responses. At this time, I didn't experience any fight, flight, or freeze, which more often than not are used for acute situations. Instead, the two other trauma responses I had were people pleasing or fawning, and dissociating or falling. So I described the dissociating and then the people pleasing a bit. So those are just kind of the main trauma responses I experienced between the age of 6 and 17, from stopping crying till now I get into how things changed at 17. It feels really good to express the story and to have as much perspective on things as I do now. It's felt very lonely. It's felt very isolating. I felt very misunderstood, and I just didn't want to be here. So it feels good to relieve that. So at 17, I left one of my caregivers, the one who was responsible for the DID and SA and psychological torture. And it was terrible because I thought all my problems I've described up until this point, other than maybe like the physical problems, I thought all my problems were because of this one person. But the problems remained, and I was like, okay, I guess they didn't just magically go away. This is awful. So kind of the summer after that, I was just incredibly numb. This was like between junior and senior year of high school. I was just really numb, and I didn't know what my I thought all this, my like sadness would end once I left this person. But at this time, I was also on the internet, and I really liked Tumblr, and I started relating to Tumblr posts like about depression, and I didn't know like what depression was before this. I didn't know I had it. I also related to, anxiety and stuff, and I came to realize that I had like an eating disorder as well. For me, my eating disorder was a lot related to ARFID, which is common with people with autism. Just a lot of food sensitivity. But I have extremely high metabolism, but I would binge eat very sweet food to the point I wasn't hungry for anything else, and I was rapidly losing weight. Particularly, that's how it was happening for me. And I felt, and I also didn't know what self-harm was. I didn't know what being suicidal was. But looking at Tumblr, I felt very seen for the first time. I finally understood what I'd been going through my entire life, really born this way. And so it's like Maybelline. And it was also really awful though, because it felt like I started like romanticizing it, and there's a lot of like, although I wasn't anorexic myself, although I was rapidly losing weight, but it was because of binging. I don't know. I would look at like the hashtag like Anna Inspo, and I'm like, oh, these people are sad just like me. Like, it's okay to be sad. I can actually live this beautiful life, and my pain is art, and it's beautiful and tragic. And it was a time, and it was helpful for me to accept what I was going through, to even be aware. Like, I'm so grateful that, in the past we didn't even have the, as much knowledge or acceptance. So it was really great that I even had this and didn't think, oh, I'm just crazy. Instead I knew I now had the terminology and the knowledge, and at the same time I was looking at this stuff that was romanticizing it instead of really helping me cope with it. So that brings me to 18. When I was 18, I was almost done with high school, and I stopped going to high school for 2 weeks when I was almost finished, like the last semester. And up until this point, I had been, for the most part, a straight A student. School felt like my worth, my value. It felt like kind of part of my people pleasing as well. Like, I think I'm an awful, terrible person because I'm sad, and I thought that I was a perverted person due to my intrusive thoughts. And so I'm like, but if I can make people happy, if I can not have any needs myself, and if I can be amazing at school, then I'm like worthy to be a person. But you kind of only have to do high school. You don't have to go to college. And I never wanted to live. And so the idea of finishing high school and still having to live when I didn't want to live sounded like the worst thing in the world. So I stopped going to school. I just couldn't. I couldn't deal with high school almost being over because I didn't want to keep living. I'm like, I've worked so hard. I've done the best I can. Like, please let me off this ride. I'm not having fun. And so I got on an antidepressant at that time. I got diagnosed with depression, and I did go back to school. That's a whole nother terrible experience of what happened, but I graduated with C's, just barely. And after that, I just, at more at the age of 18 and then 19, it's like I just turned everything off. I went off the antidepressant medicine, cold turkey. And while, from the age of 6 to 17, or I guess more until 18, I was still crying after I left that one caregiver, but after high school, I just turned all my emotions off. So I went from pretending to be happy, and I genuinely was experiencing moments of happiness as well as really intense crying at night every day until I was 18, and then I just stopped. And I was just numb, and it's like I felt nothing. Like it was all bubbling under the surface, but I just put a brick wall over it. I'm like, nope, no happiness, no sadness, nothing. I don't want to be here. I'm just gonna nothing. And I never really felt that way before. So let's see what else I just I had no plan, and also I stopped having meltdowns by the age of 6 because I just started people pleasing really hard. I started masking really hard, but I used to have meltdowns, these really big crying spells. But when I was 19, since I was so numb and people pleasing was so painful, and I also wasn't feeling sad, it was just really weird. It was really odd, rather. I did have a meltdown for the first time since I was 6, and it was really intense. It was really intense because I thought I had to people please, but I couldn't. So I eloped. I just ran away. I fell on the ground. My vision started going. My hearing started going, not all the way. And I cried for a good 2-3 hours, and it was terrifying. On the ground in front of people. It's not a good time. So, moving on. I'm trying to allow myself to feel uncomfortable and to tell my story in discomfort. And I also feel, I don't know, I feel uncomfortable laughing at it too, because it feels I don't know, sometimes it just feels so much, oh my gosh, I went through so much, it doesn't feel real, or it just feels too much, that's not real, that couldn't have all possibly happened to you. It feels silly to myself, it feels invalidating, I'm not sure. But, okay, now, from the age of 20 to 24 is where we're at now. So, okay, from the age of 20 to 24 is a time in my life categorized by various romantic relationships that I was in, that I won't specify with whom or anything like that, but I was in several different relationships that contributed to my mental health. So, in relationships in general, specifically romantic and sexual relationships. I'm realizing now I haven't really mentioned gender up until this point. I was masking so hard, I didn't know that I was a trans man. I didn't know that I was queer. I'm polyamorous and demisexual, and I didn't realize this, although I was very, very intrigued by queerness since I was like 15. I didn't know that I was queer until I was 18. So that's kind of how things happened for me in that sense, and I want to make a whole separate video just about my queerness in general, but just to put that out there, how like my mental health affected me even like realizing I was queer. So in relationships in my early 20s, I just felt very desperate for connection, just very anxious, just wanting to really experience anything, because I had spent a good year and a half at this point just feeling nothing, just feeling numb, spent my whole life just being miserable, and I didn't care anymore. I didn't have any plans. I lost being a people pleaser to an extent during that numb time. I just wanted to experience anything, because I didn't, as much as I wanted to end things and my life, I also felt like I just couldn't. Up until this point, I had never self-harmed. I never had any attempts or any plans of suicide. And so I was just kind of coasting and waiting for things to end. But yeah, instead, like with this real lack of identity, I kind of attached my identity to the people I was dating. And like I felt like I was them almost. I just wanted to live life through them and like be an observer again, but instead of myself, just be a person for them, and almost to like earn love, because I felt very undeserving of love. And yeah, at this time too, I did start having self-harm during some of these relationships that weren't healthy for me, which I hadn't had before. I also started having different health problems. So it was around the age of 21 or 22, I think 21, where I don't know exactly. Well, what was happening was that the relationships I was in were very unhealthy. Yeah, so this makes sense to talk about first. I hadn't really ever experienced being or fronting as the altar star before with narcissistic personality disorder. But since I really just didn't care about life or anything, unfortunately, during my early 20s, that altar came out, and I found myself in situations that I morally don't agree with, that I really regret, and instead of ending them or being at peace with them, I more was trying to people please and use as little Lulu, and then use my altar star to like very intentionally manipulate people that I was dating to kind of cover up other things, just in a vague sense. So that's the first time that altar really came out of Star, and I felt in a way in control. It felt like all the things that this caregiver had shown me in terms of very intentional psychological torture. I'm like, wow, I'm actually really, really skilled in this, and I can make people believe the lies I tell because I make myself on a psychological and neurological level believe them, with my posture, with my hands not sweating, with my eyes not looking a certain way, and just this whole, it just felt like life was like a play that I was like putting on, and it was terrible. And anyways, this led to some of my health issues, because at a time in some of these relationships, I kind of lost the drive, or what was driving me to be the altar star. I lost like the situation that was happening. And then I also lost the will to kind of be little Lulu as the people pleaser. Because it's like I couldn't make certain people happy anymore, like in these relationships, because I messed up so bad at this point. And also was just, yeah. And so I only altar I really had left was Void, because again, Sarah is still like locked in the back of my head. Yeah, which I'll mention next too. But yes, with Sarah, what happened is that around this time, it might have even been before these health issues, my memories of the SA from 0 to 3 came back to me. And that was a whole traumatic time, and the altar Sarah started being unlocked at that time. This is around like 21, maybe a little later, I'm not sure. And so that started happening. But with Lil Lulu and Star out of the picture, I really only was really left with Void, with depression, and maybe Sarah with like anxiety. And so with that, I was able, again, I struggled with binge eating, but without these two altars and only with Void left and with depression, suicidality, I stopped being able to eat like physically. When I would eat certain very nutritious things for myself, I would get like deathly sick, and I've never really been this sick before. It was to the point I couldn't lay down. I could only sit. I couldn't even go on my phone. I was just staring at a wall for like 2 weeks in unbearable pain. I went to a million doctors. No one could figure out what was wrong with me. And I realize now in hindsight, it's because I didn't have access to these two altars. I only had access to Void, who didn't want to eat. And that was like physically, kind of like with the connective tissues, like destroying it. It's just, I couldn't physically like pass things through my body. So I went on this whole like white rice diet and just cut out those few things from my diet for the time and rebuilt other things. So I figured out there's just a few ingredients that were really triggering this. So that's what happened with my stomach. And then two other things with health during this like 4 or 5 year period, when I went to a pelvic floor specialist because of issues in my romantic relationships and with remembering the SA from this caregiver. My pelvic floor was messed up at this time. I was having constant UTI infections, but I didn't actually have the infection. But so I'll explain all that in another video. It's really intense. It happened for like a year and a half before I finally did anything about it. It was a really intense constipation. It was just very, very uncomfortable, very dysfunctional, and intercourse was extremely painful at this time too, and it had not been before. So I went to a pelvic floor specialist that in the long run really helped out with that. Which I can talk further about in another video. The last health thing at this time was I went to another physical therapist for my spine and neck, because I was complaining to the pelvic floor person. I'm like, I have all this muscle pain. I tried PT when I was 14, 15, didn't work at all. And she's like, well, you're doing really general stuff at a very general place. You need to go to a spine and neck person, and we have one here. I'm like, great. And so I went, and and what this person said, that basically I have always been in fight or flight, and so I had no like front neck muscles activated, they're all atrophied, and no like deltoid muscles, were all atrophied, and I was only using the back of my neck and the top of my shoulders to just move and live and be alive. Which is not how things are supposed to be. But after, 20 some years of doing that, that's why at 14 I started having a headache that never ended and started having migraines. So it took probably maybe 6 months, and even just doing really simple exercises were giving me migraines. It was really intense. But after 6 months, my like, let's see, my like eight, yeah, I had, yeah, because it was at 22 that it stopped. So my 8 year headache ended because I built up the right muscles and taught my body how to be out of fight or flight in a sense, which I again was literally just born neck straight, ready to fight. So those are the health things that happen. Yes, I also had new trauma responses. So the people pleasing was there, the dissociation was there, but there was several times where I started having the flight response where I needed space in my relationships, and that wasn't being granted to me, and I was fleeing out of where I was living with like no shoes, no phone, no coat, just running to get out. And that happened a good handful or so of times. And there was one time where I did have a fight response, the only time in my life where the door was being blocked and I needed to flee. I'm like, I can't do this. I can't argue with you anymore. I need to get out of the house. Like, I feel like I'm dying. And the person was like, nope, not letting you out. And so I raised my fist. I've never punched someone in my life. I realized I wanted to punch this person. I turned and I punched a mirror instead and broke this like favorite mirror of mine. I was very sad. So that's the only time I had like a fight response. Yeah. I'm looking at what else I wrote here. So basically, and there's a lot of details I'm not getting into about like a lot of my mental health journey through these relationships and like kind of my mindset, which maybe I'll get into in other videos. But basically what happened was was during this time between the age of 20 and 24, I had I was having arguments with some of these people that got so intense that I wasn't just dissociating, but I had what's called broken heart syndrome, which I thought was only really a thing with like a loved one dies and then you die because you're so sad. It's like a cortisol thing, or like you're falling from a place and you die before you hit the ground. But what happened twice, is that I was having an argument, nothing was working, and all my body just started shutting down. I couldn't see, like completely everything was black. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't feel anything. And my breathing just stopped, and I felt my heart stop. I was no longer beating, and everything just stopped. And it felt like kind of that little seed in my head where Sarah was still kind of trying to get out of, but was still kind of there. It felt like I almost just crushed the seed and vanished from existence. Like my heart literally did stop. And then it was like this whoosh of energy back into my system. It felt like I like electrocuted myself, or like that cardiac thing. And everything was back on, and I was like wide awake, and you know, I was like, whoa, I really want to live. Like, I don't even care about this, terrible situation. And I'm like, thank goodness I'm just alive, because I literally just died. And that happened twice. Before I kind of got out of these relationships. And the last thing that happened in these relationships is that I don't exactly know how to describe it, and I don't think anyways, but what happened is all my muscles contracted. So all my muscles were like this, but every single one of them, and I couldn't move. I couldn't physically move. I had to be like, I was in a wheelchair, and I couldn't move. I couldn't move anything. It was incredibly painful. Like oh my goodness, especially like my legs is so painful. And I waited forever in the emergency room. So it took like, I don't know, a good 8 hours till they pumped me full of lorazepam, I think, some anxiety medicine, and my muscles relaxed. And it was very nice. But that was just like, it was after having like a lot of panic attacks, like most days when I usually didn't have panic attacks. And it was just really, it kind of felt like my life was ending because I was no longer with these people who I attached my identity to. And that's kind of all I was living for, was for these other people, you know, from the ages, again, more like 20 to 24. And even though I, obviously needed to get out of those situations, I didn't know how to be a person by myself. And I went most of my life not wanting to be a person. So that was very stressful. So, moving on from 25 to 26. So, at this time, I was not in any type of dating, romantic, or sexual relationships after this time. And this did a lot for me because I realized a lot more of my mental and physical health struggles. So up until this point, around 17, I realized, anxiety, depression, PTSD. In my early 20s, I realized I have some amount of chronic pain. I fixed my headaches, still had migraines to an extent. Fixed things that occurred at that time with my stomach and pelvic floor, right? But now I realize other things. So I realized that I had chronic pain. I realized that I had hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and that I had POTS. And I didn't know what those things were before then, but I felt like I finally, since I wasn't with anyone, I really could like observe myself and be with myself and see who I was. And it felt like I was just on this constant hamster wheel trying to be someone for someone else, and like I couldn't observe myself almost. And I also realized at this time that I have autism and ADHD, and that I had DID as well. So I wasn't aware of the DID before the age of 25. So I'm just kind of filling in the blanks as we go now that I have this perspective and this information. So that's what really happened in those 2 years of my life, was just a lot of realization of who I am, what I've experienced, and putting labels to what I'm going through was just monumentally helpful, because you can't really start to change things or even accept things if you're not aware of what the things themselves are. So I think labels in that sense are extremely helpful. So that brings me to the last section, which is 27 to 28. I currently am 28. So when this happened in May of 2024, I had a spiritual awakening. And again, with all of these subjects, I want to make separate videos really just talking just about them and expanding on it. And I've also talked about my spiritual awakening before, especially on TikTok. So up until this point, I was not really a spiritual person. I grew up as a Christian, went to church. By the time I was an adult, I was more just agnostic. I was just like, I don't know. But also I had times specifically with that great grandmother I mentioned before, Grandma Lou, that she had really scary times with spirituality, stuff like black magic, witchcraft, possessions, and I was really terrified. I was really scared of spirituality. I was just scared. I didn't want to know anything. I'm like, I'm open to whatever, but I'm also not going to look into it because I'm terrified So I just didn't really believe in anything, but I was open. I just wasn't part of my life, wasn't very concerned with it. So going into this spiritual awakening, knowing that I didn't really have a spiritual background in this life. So what happened? Well, two things happened first is that the October before, so October 2023, I had an accident and I'd never broken anything, any of my bones, any of my body before, never really had like a big injury. But I was accidentally rammed into a metal railing and it broke my collarbone, or like dislocated it right here. And it hurt a lot. I cried. But honestly, compared to all my other just constant chronic pain that, again, I was born with and was degenerative, uh, because on the Ehlers-Danlos scale, being hypermobile, I'm just on the extreme end. It didn't really seem like an emergency to me. I had no idea I broken my collarbone. I was just like, this hurts. I got an ice pack and just continued on my day. That night, like, I usually would do some type of physical therapy, so I just laid on like a tennis ball instead of like for 30 minutes. I laid on it for 2 hours, clicked back into place, thought I was good. Because for my hypermobile's Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, what used to happen my whole life was every time I moved, several things per minute were dislocating and relocating, or, subluxating and coming back. So again, this wasn't out of the ordinary for me, but even just a little bit of that happening to most people would send them into the emergency room. So I had this injury. I didn't know it until I got an x-ray for something unrelated. And they're like, you have like scoliosis in your neck now, and this is broken. I'm like, oh, that's what happened. Okay, great. But it already said, it was months later. There's nothing I could do about it. So then that brings me to May of 2024. And this will make sense as I'm telling it in hindsight, but I have two cats. One of my cats purposely tripped me, and I fell on this shoulder, and I've never gotten it checked out. I'm very curious, but I know that one or two of like the spikes on one of my vertebrae, like right here, either fractured or broke. So now I had injuries on like both sides, here and here in the back. And so that happened. My cat purposely tripped me, knowing it would cause this injury. Again, this is going into the spiritual awareness now. I knew it hurt a lot. I didn't go to the doctor. I put on a body braid I had for the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I felt fine-ish. I put my head on like a lumbar thing and like clicked it back into place. And so, so at 14, I realized I had muscle pain. When I got this injury, I was going to an acupuncturist, and I realized I had joint pain that was like 10 times worse than my muscle pain. I just never consciously felt it before because it was too painful. And when I had this injury, my first like more bone injury, I guess, because again, this was more like a dislocation with like connective tissue, but this was like a bone injury, and I clicked my head back into place and it went back into place. I realized my bone pain is a good like 1,000 times worse than my joint pain. And I'm like, great. I've also just never felt this before because it's literally too painful to just be alive like this. As you can tell, I'm just very mad about it. It has not been a fun time living in this body in terms of pain. So again, I didn't think too much of it. I just put my body braid on. I was fine for the day. When I came back though, it started like disconnecting, and I started getting nerve damage, which I knew what it felt now because I had nerve damage that kind of went to my thumb from the collarbone thing. So I knew what nerve damage felt like at this point, and it started creeping up just the left side of my head going towards the top. And I genuinely felt if it continued, my brain was going to disconnect from my spine. And I'm like, there's no time to even call an ambulance at this point. Like, I have a matter of minutes to live. Just thoroughly convinced. And so I already did the neck thing. I already had my body braid on. I'm like, none of this is working. And so I stood up, and I'm like, I'm just going to physically align myself. And so I imagined all my bones aligning. This took like 10 minutes maybe. I imagined all my bones aligning. I imagined all my joints aligning. I imagined all my muscles on top of my bones and joints. Then I did rapid eye movement and imagined all my nerves going in the right place. And then I imagined like aligning like up and down and trying to correct the scoliosis. So like this was making me go this way and this was making me go back. So I imagined myself like going this way instead diagonally. And then I imagine my anxiety going back and my depression going forward and meeting here. And in that moment, it clicked. It was like a lightning bolt went through my body. And it felt like I could breathe for the first time in my life. And in this moment, again, not being a spiritual person before this moment, I knew that in one of my past lives, I was my great-grandma Lou. And she started speaking to me. And everything felt better. I felt almost like high. I felt exhilarated. I started frantically writing things down, like how in the world I did this. And she was speaking to me, like not like a hallucination, but more kind of like an internal thought. And I realized I started having like being flooded of all these memories from her. I started remembering a bunch of things that I couldn't have known and wasn't told. And it was just so intense. And at this time, I suddenly had the memory of exactly when the SA started in my childhood. Very, very young. And having those memories come back, too young for a person to form memories at that time. I ran into my room. I just threw myself on the floor and I was just sobbing. And I'm like, even though this injury, I guess, is magically healed at this moment, I don't want to live. I know I can vividly like see memories of this happening to me. I don't want to live anymore. And at that moment, my cat, the one who tripped me on purpose, meowed at me, and I turned around and I realized this cat, in his past life, he was my previous cat that I had all growing up in my childhood. And it was like he was saying to me, I know this is painful, but just live for me. We have another chance to be together. I'm back again. And I was bawling and I'm like, oh my gosh, my cat, like my first cat. And, I was just so happy. And that totally got me through this, like, not wanting to live for a few seconds here. Because I'm like, it's worth it, though, because I can have this relationship with this cat that's really important to me. And so what happened after this is I needed to constantly do whatever that alignment thing I'd done with my body. I needed to do it 24/7. I needed to sleep in a certain way. I needed to correct it. And I got really good where I could do that whole 10-minute thing in like 5 seconds. And as long as I did that like every half hour, I was set. I started learning physical therapy that I was doing multiple times a day to keep this up. And it was really magical because it was like if I ever stopped being aligned, the, what is it called? The nerve damage started again. And I knew it would disconnect my head from my spine. So I was forced, I was forced to do this. It was extremely uncomfortable, but I also never felt so alive. And what happened that moment that this like lightning bolt struck and I remembered a past life, every single physical and mental issue that I have described here completely went away. And I never even had a moment of my life not experiencing any of that. I didn't know what it was like to not be anxious. I didn't know what it was like to not be depressed. Also, I forgot to mention with dissociation, I had a visual snow over my vision my whole life. I didn't know what it was like to not have that. And it was magical. It was heavenly. It's like I could breathe, I could see. I never felt so alive in my life. I wasn't sad. I wasn't anxious. nothing was happening with dissociation, any of my alters. Like, I was just me. It was like being on really strong psychedelics, but that was what my whole life was like. So now I was like just completely sober, but it was as jarring as being on really strong psychedelics. And I felt really connected. I felt really connected to everyone and everything. And like, I just had all the time in the world, and I was just zen. I was just peaceful. And I started connecting to things in my life, specifically this person called Sadhguru. And I really liked his spiritual teachings. I started eating differently, sleeping differently, thinking differently. Like, I suddenly had this urge to like change everything, because it was like I needed to change everything to align mentally with how I was needing to align physically now. And it was just a really magical time. So, let me look at this again. Yeah, so this lasted, this magical time of literally no physical pain, no mental issues whatsoever that I had never experienced, and suddenly I knew about a past life, and other things were flooding into, which I'll mention in other videos. This lasted for about 3 weeks of just pure bliss. And then I got sick, and it all went away. And every single issue I had was back. And I think I know what happened is that I needed those 3 weeks to physically set in that vertebrae, those 2 spikes, or 1 spike on that vertebrae, to have it heal in the right position. Because now I didn't need to align myself anymore. If I relaxed, no nerve damage would come anymore. But all of my physical and mental issues returned. I was devastated. I was like, because I still had all these like rotten roots. I couldn't just be a magical flower sustainably, unfortunately. So I was devastated. And it was a really rough time for the next like 4 months. It was just awful. I was in so much pain. And it was now more that I was aware of really how much pain I was in, because I had nothing to compare it to. You know, I was just really born with the majority of this. So that kind of changed more about a year ago, about last October, where I started being open to more spiritual things. So I'd already been open to Sadhguru and kind of chakras and things like that. But now I was being open more to just spirituality as a whole. I started looking into witchcraft and tarot, things that I was, again, terrified of because of my knowledge of what happened to my Grandma Lou, but now also realizing I literally did live her life, and that makes sense that I was scared of those things because they literally happened to my soul. So at this time, I was just kind of cracking open to all of this. So I started forming a relationship with the goddess Hecate. And I also, I asked, I just kind of had a relationship with higher beings in general, and just like my own divinity within myself. And I have had 180 past lives, and in 70 of them, I've worked with Hecate, and I have been a witch. So I started working with Hecate again in October. She started talking with me specifically through the crows. I started channeling for her, I think, late spring of this year, 2025, doing direct channels where she would talk through me. And unfortunately, really just a month ago, I had a falling out with her, which I haven't opened up about yet, and I won't get into all of it, but basically, up until 2023, she was very angry. She was wanted to just destroy humanity and start over. She's really mad because SA happened to her. She's also Medusa. And she put her soul in a lot of people, including me, to try to protect them. It never protected them from the initial abuse, but it protected them throughout other things. And I realized that she just really didn't want to, for herself, just had a real big hatred of romance and sexuality. I was trying to process some things myself, what I want in my future, and I was getting a lot of resistance from her. And I asked her, like, is your soul, because what she tried to do after 2023 and what she was trying to do through me was change her approach. Instead of trying to change things out of anger and honestly fear, she came to the realization you have to change things through love. And I was helping her do that. I was helping her give these messages, and I was kind of editing them as well, because I'm like, you just can't say certain things. It's cruel. Like, you think that, but tap into what your higher self wants, And, I was really excited to continue working with her. I really wanted this to be a long and, healthy relationship and change things together. I asked her, though, if she, was put part of her soul into me, because she really regretted it, because you had to unalive someone to put her soul into you, kind of like a Horcrux. And she's like, this is really messed up what I did. She went through this whole process of grieving and forgiving herself and forgiving others, and was still kind of in this process of forgiving people who've harmed her, because she was like, those people should not be here, but the good people should. And I'm like, we're all one, man. It doesn't really work that way. You're harboring a lot of anger and hatred, and it's preventing you from it was really preventing her from knowing herself, which was devastating. But I was trying to process myself, and I was like, hey, like, you put part of your soul into me out of fear, didn't you? Like, I understand protecting me, that's nice, but you did it out of fear. You didn't do it out of love. And therefore, I no longer want your protection in this form. I only want protection that is from the energy of love. Regardless of your intention, it was out of fear. It was not out of love. And so I did this energetic thing, just like that. Took a few seconds and said, I release your soul back to you. And she didn't know if that was possible. I didn't know. I just decided. I just knew it was. And I released from her. She was really mad. And I'm like, that's fine. Your ego self feels whatever. As long as you're being kind to me when you talk to me, that's fine. And I was talking with her every day. I was doing these channeled messages with her. And she was getting really frustrated and not being very patient with things, especially with how much rest I needed. She just went from really quickly wanting to angrily change everything to really quickly wanting to change everything with love. And I'm like, that's not a loving energy. We need patience. We need time. We need gestation. And so, I just was giving herself space, and I thought she would, come back to me and we'd talk things out. I mean, we had a really full relationship, up until this time. It's been a whole year. And unfortunately, she was just really mad that I was processing what I want in romantic and sexual relationships, and was feeling really mad that I was working with certain other spiritual entities. Again, I was willing to work with her as long as she respected me and was kind, but she wasn't giving me space. She was just yelling at me. And so I ended things with her. I decided I'm not working with her anymore, because she couldn't give me space. She wasn't respecting my preferences, and it was just really awful. So instead, I've really turned to Lilith recently to kind of process romantic and sexual things, which has been really nice. I work with Mother Gaia really heavily as well, and have a lot of other spiritual things going on as well that I won't mention at this time. So, yeah, so that just kind of happened a month ago, maybe even just a few weeks ago. But I mentioned in my mental health journey that I've dealt with intrusive thoughts. When I was a kid, it was more just kind of this dreading the sense of hopelessness really covered up by masking. I just wouldn't really even listen to my intrusive thoughts. In my early 20s with self-harm and and when I was 17 and became aware of what suicidal ideation was, and that's a thing you can do, then the intrusive thoughts were getting more specific because I was aware of what was possible and kind of what this feeling was tied to. And then I also mentioned, starting at the age of 4, having very sexually inappropriate intrusive thoughts as well, which were just very mortifying to me. And again, as a child, I just thought that was me. I thought some people were just born like that, just bad people. So I never really even opened up to anyone, any therapist, any family member, any friend, any partner about that, because I just felt too ashamed, even though I knew at this point as an adult that I am not my emotions, I am not my thoughts, I am how I treat myself, I am what actions I take with that. It's how I react and respond to how I'm feeling and thinking. It just felt really heavy. And so a few months ago, in the last 2 years, I've done a lot of work with my DID since realizing I have it, journaling to specific altars, really setting up areas in my home to honor them, doing activities they want to do, and that has been really healing and wonderful. And really what happened is that I realized I was pushing down a lot of my intrusive thoughts, and to kind of go through any tough emotions, you got to go through it. You can't really go around it. You can't just push it to the back. So I decided to just fully feel and allow myself to hear all these intrusive thoughts. And it was awful. It hurt so much. It was like having all these thoughts in your head that used to be kind of just like static background noise, like a fridge you didn't notice is on until the power, oh, look at my hand back there, till the power goes off. But no, I'm avoiding them, and I want to process them. I want to give myself space. I want to be more healed. I want to process my trauma. This is awful. I don't like how this feels. I want to feel how I felt during those 3 weeks of that spiritual awakening. And so I listened to the thoughts, and I had them get louder and louder and clearer, and it was like all the different altars were all yelling at me at the same time, speaking to me. It was really intense, and I'll get more into the specifics of that in another video just about intrusive thoughts. But after about 2 months of just constantly listening to the thoughts, allowing them to be there and saying kind things to them of, I see you, I hear you, because I'd gone my whole life hating my thoughts, hating my emotions, hating my body, hating my pain, because it was so awful and painful. But I realized that I needed to show myself love to make it feel better, and that the more I hated it, the worse it was getting. And so I'm like, I just need to hear it all, even though it's 28 years of just compressed terribleness. That's where I am. Just got to accept it. And so after about 2 months, the thoughts started dying down, and it's I don't know, it's a few months after that now. This is again in late spring, early summer 2025 this year. And now it's November and we're in the fall, and I don't really get the intrusive thoughts anymore. It's just so amazing. I thought I had to live my whole life like this. I thought I had to live my whole life like this, and it was just awful. And I know now that really going through the feelings and accepting yourself really helps change things and move things along. So I have a lot more to say about all of this, about each individual aspect, and I plan to make videos going in depth about each subject. For example, one just on depression, just on DID, just on anxiety. And as I mentioned, like just on queerness too. So, but first I wanted to do a video talking about an overview of my whole life up until now. I'm also just really excited because, as I mentioned at the beginning, healing and learning and growing is a lifelong journey, and I'll have so much more to say and so much more knowledge, wisdom, information, and perspective, in a year's time, in 10 years' time. And I'm really excited. I know things can get so much better because they have for me. And for everyone watching, I'm just really grateful for you taking the time to see me, to hear my story, and to be here all together, connected as one. So that's all I have to say for now, and I thank you for watching, and I look forward to putting out more videos like this very soon.